word creator thing. I think both of those are really powerful things.
Yeah. There's when I built my SEO MBA course, one of the first things I did was I built a landing page in Figma as an like envisaging like exercise, like not as a design exercise, not as like this is what the page is actually going to look like, but just as a what if I made this thing in the world? and it's almost like the in the book Working Backwards about how Amazon works. Like one of the first things they do with any project is they write the press release. Like I feel like Figma is a great tool for doing the same thing. It's like you make the landing page first, and like that kind of thinking through how to make a landing page kind of cascades backwards through all of these decisions around positioning and like, oh, I'm going to need some testimonials because they're going to plug in here, and like this curriculum like makes sense, it looks real. Like there's a lot of that, I think, especially for solo creators. I think there's a huge like missing component around like what are we even supposed to be doing. There's like a ton of like steering by intuition and steering by guts, and so again, that's where I find it helpful to like try and make the most real thing first and then do that kind of working backwards. So I find Figma just like a great tool for that.
Yeah, welcome, Emmanuel and Bazad. Is that right? Bazad. Great to meet you.
What up?
Too. What's up? Let's go, guys. Look at all these familiar faces.
I know, this is a good crew. Well, I just want to hang out and chat, but we got work to do. should we fire up the Figma, Nate? And
yeah, let's do it. I'm going to share out a link. I think maybe the best thing to do, we can always kind of change this on the fly, but I'll post a link to our Figma file, which is empty at the moment. So you don't see anything, you're not doing anything wrong. And if have we all used Figma at some point? Okay, cool. One of the fun things that maybe all of you know, but something I always kind of have to teach my clients is if you ever want to just sit back and let the person drive, you can click on Tom's face or my face in the little circle kind of avatar up in the toolbar, and you can kind of go hands-free, and then you can kind of basically watch us drive the file, which is kind of a fun thing to do. So that's kind of how I use it for presentations all the time. Like just sit back, click on my face, and I'll walk you through everything.
Can you give permissions access, Nate?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's
So maybe before we go too much further, now that we've got a group here, let's just give a little context here. So I want to tell a little story about, I'm an independent consultant, right? So I do marketing strategy, digital strategy, and worked with Toby Shorin a couple of years ago on a project where we were doing a design sprint for a client. And working with Toby, who he has a real design background, unlike me, who have no design background. He knew his way around Figma, and he was working on this project in Figma, and I was like sitting side by side with him, watching him work, and it just kind of blew my mind. I was like, "What is this tool? Like, it's so much more intuitive and so much easier to work with than Photoshop. It's all in the browser. It's fast. It's collaborative. It's like Google Docs. It's great." And we did it, so that was kind of like my onboarding, which is kind of watching Toby work. And then ever since that moment, this is like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago now, ever since that moment, I just like, I spend all my time in Figma. I do everything from, like I was talking about, envisaging projects, I did my yearly goals, which I did in Figma. Bezos, you'll be pleased to know after you trash talked me about doing it in Google Docs. So I designed like an A4 piece of paper that I printed out. I designed social assets, but then in my consulting work, I also do this like I do a lot of this kind of envisaging, prototyping, concepting work, right? Where I'm like, hey, what if the landing page looked like this? Or here's what we have today. Here are some ways that improve it, or that kind of thing. And so I had this idea, this kind of like, oh, more people should be using Figma. More people should go through the transformation that I went through, which was like watching a real designer at work and then applying it to a lot of non-design work, right? Like I'm not a designer day by day. And so then I was like, hey, we should do this course called Figma for Knowledge Workers. And I was chatting with Nate about it. And I said, Nate, you should do this course. And then eventually I was like, screw it, I want to do the course. And then Nate was like, let's do it together. And it was like, great. And then Johnny chimed in and was like, you should build it in public. And so literally here we are. That's kind of the thing. So the idea of like, we don't even have real shape for what like course means yet, whether it's going to be like a live, cohort course or a self-paced course. All of that structure is up for grabs, but we're building it here in public. So this is the first session basically of us riffing and working, hopefully, on making progress towards bringing this thing into the world. Anything I missed from that story, Nate?
No, I think you got it. I think you got it. I'll just quickly introduce myself for anybody who doesn't know me. I'm Nate Cadillac. There's a couple of people I don't know who might be a part of Tom's fan club. But yeah, I've been a designer for a long time, mostly a brand and product designer. And I recently left my last role as a creative director in 2021, so 18 months ago. And I use Figma almost every day. I use it in a typical design role, but I do use it for prototyping quite a bit, presenting to clients, mood boards. I teach a design workshop, and I use it to kind of bring in imagery and help create emotion and vibe that can be implemented in design later. And so I just love it. I've been using it. I knew a guy in San Francisco when I was living there, and he had been working there early on. And so I kind of started in the browser before they had the desktop app, and just converted everybody I can since. So I'm a total fanboy. Yeah, that's a great comment. Yeah, I kind of, I use Miro a little bit too. But it's just something I haven't really like fully adopted yet, which is partly because Figma and FigJam and everything there.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me ends up being that Miro works on iPad. And so a lot of times I'll go from annotating a thing to drawing a thing to like blowing it up. And like I can easily do a lot of the manipulation in Miro that I wish. And like I had friends who worked on Figma for iPad, and I used to just like yell at them to please like actually make it useful. Yeah. But yeah, it's just unnecessary because you do all this work and then you're like, cool, now I need to go build this shit. And then you have to leave. And Miro is good for a lot of the collaborative stuff, but not good for real like detailed design work. So
yep.
I find that whenever I'm in a workshop running Miro, I instantly butt up against those like frustrations. I mean, I'm instantly like, it's the same thing with FigJam, actually, like even which is like the Figma version of Miro. Like whenever I'm in there, I just find myself hungry to like actually do some like more powerful stuff. But again, I think a lot of people use Miro, like maybe one of our target audiences for this course would be people who are comfortable using Miro and not comfortable using Figma, but want to like make that leap, right? I think that would be a great kind of like mission statement almost. It's like helping people level up their skills to feel like they can play with real Figma, not just like gloves on Figma, which is like FigJam and Miro. Yeah, so Nate put a link to the Figma file that we're just jamming in the comments. Inside the Figma file, I should like use a Figma plugin to import a PDF, which is like probably the most backwards workflow. But this is a Google Doc that we were jamming on. So this was just our original kind of first notes that we had. And yeah, everyone can just kind of spend a few moments, I guess, reading that. Feel free to leave notes, comments, additions as you go through that. Hi, Alessandra. Yeah, I think there's some open questions in there. Yeah, maybe everyone spends a few minutes there.
Yeah, I think the last page is something that's we would love to get some eyes on, which has a few questions that we're making some assumptions of. So when we come back, if anybody has any thoughts or any ideas around that, that'd be really helpful.
I guess my first question to you guys, just getting into the summary, is like, do you believe you'll be attracting people who want to become full-time designers? And maybe rephrase how you're pitching that, because I think, you know, by saying it's for people who are not full-time designers might, you know, mislead some people. At least for me, the thing that I thought of when I saw that you guys were going to do this, as a software engineer and YouTuber, is like, I watch you guys think in Figma. And like, that's a really powerful idea. I think if you guys can capture that somehow in this copy, that like, you're going to teach people how to think in Figma, that becomes applicable to someone like me as software engineer, the YouTuber, and then, you know, the online freelance creator person, and also the aspiring designer, or even a designer who maybe admires some of the stuff that you guys do, and wants to emulate that sort of like frictionless thought to canvas interface that you guys do.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think like a lot of people are visual thinkers. Like, so let me back up. When you draw a line in the world between visual thinkers and non-visual thinkers, I guess, I think people instantly don't call themselves visual thinkers because they think of like too heavy-handedness, but like, it's almost like spatial thinkers versus non-spatial thinkers is the real distinction here. And I would never have called myself a visual thinker, but I find myself doing a lot of thinking in Figma on a canvas, right? And so I think that exact transformation is powerful. I like the idea of using the language visual thinking, or like thinking with Figma. I think that's a really strong call to action. Nothing's set in stone, but my hesitation about like doing this for designers is like quite intentionally don't want to cover the full feature set for Figma. Like I don't want to have to get into all of the use cases for Figma, because like under the hood, you can do everything with Photoshop, everything with Figma that you could do with Photoshop, right? And like, then we're like just teaching you a ton of stuff. And I rather kind of constrain it almost to, I want to give you enough of the tools and enough confidence that you can find those things on your own. But that's obviously up for debate. You know?
I'll just add that, yeah, I think I've always been a little resistant to thinking about this under the design umbrella, even though I am a designer. I think that there's so much potential in helping people bring their ideas forth in the very early stages. And Figma's been a really great tool to do that, because you can just kind of work at a very low level, connect a few screens, see like a simple prototype, maybe even create a presentation, hand that off to a designer if you want to kind of go that route. And they'll be able to kind of continue that conversation, all using this tool. And so I think design is, in my mind, and I could be incorrect, but like it's sort of like set off to the side here, while we bring in a ton of like you were talking about, just like a ton of visual thinking into this whole process and into what we're trying to build. So that's just my 2 cents. There's that design gap, right? Like it's a lot of people who want to bring their ideas into the world, who are not maybe traditional designers. And then there's like, you know, designers, but then there's this huge gap here. And so in a way, like I think about it, like we're trying to nudge that first part of the gap, you know, closer to the right side, in a way.
Nate, should we do a little bit of envisaging of our own and try and design the landing page while everyone's reading the doc? I started a screen over here on the right. Like I said, it was one of the first things I did when I launched my SEO MBA course, was just like kind of jump to the end a little bit. And we can either do a landing page just for the email sign up or for the full course, but just trying to like start to get some language down, I think would be fun, useful, interesting.
Yeah, this is kind of the process I always go through. You know, and thinking out some of my ideas is like, I don't even really worry about design too much in the early stages, but just kind of dropping in some content that, yeah, Alessandra, awesome. It's, Johnny just posted on Twitter right before this call. He's kind of working on some podcast art, and you almost like, when I think about like a landing page, it's like you want to design with the end in mind somewhat. And for us, it's kind of like, because we're thinking about a landing page, we're going to set up the constraints, kind of get an idea of what that means. And when you're doing podcast art, which you can do in Figma, but think about where it's going to be placed, in Spotify and Apple. And so as I kind of think through this, I'm always thinking about like, what's the end in mind? What's the context that we're sort of roughing this stuff into for?
While Tom's doing that, I dropped in a couple different comments, but I do think that and Tom and I've had flavors of this conversation around like what executive presence is or whatever, but I do think, and very biased from my own career, like this just feels like communication skills in a digital first era, like being able to communicate and support your arguments. Like if you read something that's hundreds of pages of text, it sucks, versus pages of text with other types of things that people can engage with, right? For different types of learning styles, and something like, images are really powerful. And so there's things you can do like contrast, size, juxtaposition, whatever, with images that you can't do with words. And this feels honestly like I would lean towards like wrapping it in the new MBA or whatever that is, of like, these are just actual skills that you need to have to function in a lot of the work that we're doing. Especially because a lot of us do a lot of illegible work, and this is a way to make a lot of that illegibility more tangible for folks, or like we're doing the translation so that people understand what we do, and words are not always the right way to do that.
Well, that phrase illegible work, that's definitely, I think there's definitely there's something very deep rooted about the idea of doing illegible work and wanting to make your ideas understood. Like it's just, like you said, it's a communication challenge, but I think that's a specific one. A lot of like, frankly, independent weirdos suffer to, like, more than everyone else, right? We're weirdos and we have strange ideas, and it's like we're constantly trying to get other people to like see from our vantage point. And I think that's a message that seems to resonate.
Yeah, we don't need to get into this too much, but we did talk about like, where would this even live? And I think you were right that it probably makes sense under SEO MBA, that kind of umbrella.
And just for context for this group, there's a kind of I've got designs to expand the SEO MBA into what Bezos alluded to, the new MBA, which is like essentially the same thing, teaching business skills, communication skills to folks. And I think this Figma course could easily live under that umbrella. So I guess you work for me now, Nate.
Yeah.
That's how this works, right?
Yeah, right.
What other questions do you have,
Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe kind of while we're just doing this, if anybody else has, I'd be kind of curious to hear how people are using, doesn't have to be Figma, but just tools in visual thinking, and how they use that during the day. Feel free to just come off mute and jump in.
I'm Alessandra, and everybody says, oh, I just use Canva. Oh, I just use Canva. Oh, I just use Canva. And I go to Canva and I'm like, what the hell is that? And I go to Figma and there's an awful lot of what the hell is that? Except there's something, I feel like I belong there. I feel like there's room to think there. I feel like there's room for me to develop like whatever that feeling is, like, how does that need to be expressed? Is that a shape first? Is that a color first? What is that about? And I can follow it when I'm in Sigma versus if I'm sitting there in Canva, it's like somebody else already did the thinking. And I'm like, I just need to leave this room now. Thank you. That's just a very big contrast for me in tool and thinking styles and learning styles.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I have a similar kind of allergic reaction to pre-built things or things that feel like they're putting me in a box. I think that's what's so appealing in a way to Figma, is like, you can do anything, but it doesn't feel as daunting as a you can do anything like Photoshop, you know, kind of feeling. Bezos, I think you should have access now. So if anyone wants to copy and paste in other examples of stuff that they're working on, like either work examples or Figma stuff or anything else you think is relevant, feel free to jam alongside us. You know, one of the questions we have, and one of the maybe the biggest kind of forks in the road for this whole project is, I have a hunch that product managers are a core audience, right? Like Figma for product managers. You know, Figma for knowledge workers sounds cute, but like maybe the real business here is Figma for product managers, right? Like, you know, that's kind of like one of my questions. I don't know if anyone here is a product manager or identifies anywhere on that spectrum, but I'd be curious. Like, yeah, it's like we've obviously got a few more of the like independent creator weirdos here, partly because we're all just hanging out on Zoom in the middle of the day, and, you know, from Twitter, which you obviously biases towards a certain kind of person. But that's one of the tensions that I love trying to tease out, is like, you know, are we being too cute with Figma for knowledge workers, and should we just like really kind of like go through the front door, which is Figma for product managers?
It's a tough one. This is like one of those questions around how niche do you go? And I tend to like the idea of targeting product managers, because I also have worked with a lot of them, and there's a real pain point. And if anybody here is, please speak up. But like, it seems like there's a real pain point of like having the feeling of needing to know how to design or how to kind of like do some of the preliminary work. And I'm really close to that. So that makes a lot of sense, but I also like broadening it up just a little bit to Tom's point. Who maybe we could just quickly, like, I'd be curious to know what you all do. How do you sort of identify yourself, or what?
Yeah, it's Romain. Actually, I was writing a comment about the first question because I'm not a product manager, so I can't really explain about the rest, but I'm working basically in comms and advertising agency. I'm doing research for brands basically, but I'm from agencies, and for years there's been like a need for another format or type of file or for delivery and presentation than like a 100 slides PDF. Like, it's boring, everyone wants something more innovative or something like that, but actually there is no new standard, so it's still the same thing. I know there's been a push for prototyping for a moment a few years ago, but not every idea is easily easy to make as a prototype. It's mostly for products, a bit like an international campaign or a positioning. You can't really prototype that. So I know that there is definitely an opportunity to make presentation more interesting. Yet there is no tool that does that right now. Also, it's a heavy industry to move. Like, they all want innovation, but when it's here, no one does that because it's complicated. Figma, I mean, the software doesn't work for everybody. Like, it's a new tool in a heavy industry that has really like big process. Even if it wants to say that it's innovative, it's not that innovative. It's still all about reports. Like, we are at the start of 2023. We have been flooded by hundreds of trend reports, and they are all PDFs. There is nothing innovative. And so everyone wants something different, like more interactive or whatever. But at the end, it's just like Google Slides or Keynotes. That's not innovative. So I know that's the thing that I'm personally, and I think would be really interesting to mix different kind of visual thinking or visual presentation representing. That is not just like a static PDF and someone pushing like the down key on the keyboard, next slide, next slide, next slide. And I've been a few sessions, actually, Tom, you know them, but other internets, they do a lot of Figma stuff. And I've been in a presentation about like I don't know, something about like the governance for during the French Revolution and how the money and the financial aspect was. And it was actually an academic lecturer doing a presentation with like you could see the connected IDs, you could see any type of different IDs presented differently. It was really more interesting than just someone presenting a PDF. Like you can come back to the previous points, you can connect to the new to different IDs. It's both like a horizontally, vertically presentation. It's really more interesting. So yeah, all that to say that there is definitely a need and a want to have more interesting presentation or final deliverable, but it's still the same gold standard for everyone, like 100 slides PDF.
Yeah, I think there's something, there's like a Trojan horse idea here, right? Which is the level one, the next 12 months is, hey, learn Figma so that you can interface with product managers and other parts of the business and do more visual thinking. The like 24, 36 months horizon maybe starts to look a bit more like, hey, the web is just generally a bit more spatial now. Like we're not necessarily using Figma as a place to do work that then gets shared elsewhere. Like actually Figma links are documents and are circulating the web in a way that is kind of a new medium, right? That visual essay that this is not quite what you're describing, but it's also from other internet. I'm going to drop a link in the comments, but they basically turned a very long, 10,000 word blog post into a Figma essay as a kind of new kind of media object, and I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, I think that's kind of exciting. Like more of that kind of stuff, I think is going to happen. Whether it explicitly happens in Figma or not, you kind of TBD a little bit, right? There are other tools that might do that, but I think a lot of the raw skills that you'll learn, hopefully in this course, that would be the ambition, would prepare you for this new world.
Yeah, just to finish, I don't think there is a world in which like this kind of Figma presentation will be the new standard, but I think it will just be for like independent who wants to add like something that makes them specific. If you come with a new way of presenting your research of your work, you will score instant points for the clients. Like you are someone different and doing stuff in a more interesting and different ways, and that's all like that. That's so easy to score 3 points for the clients, right? Like that. Of course, like Publicis will never do stuff on Figma. It's too complicated. Like you have too much freedom actually. But they are like it's a charted environment. Like everyone has to respect the same stuff in big agencies. So it's more for the free thinker, I guess. I don't like people who are allowed and wants to do stuff differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that, Lisa. Like I think one designer I know who does that well is the guy who runs Design Joy, and he puts all of his portfolio work in a Figma file, and clients just swipe through that presentation, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of times where it's like, instead of dropping a link in a Keynote or a Google slide, it's like I could have just blown this up in Figma and then let you go deep on like, oh, here's a cluster of other things that may be interesting, or like even just having a second dimension to let people play in. Not to mention that like this is multimedia would have been amazing, but instead I give them these like static artifacts, or I have to go build it as a website, and then it's just like it's so much pain. Versus this, where like this is a website and multimedia and an infinite multiplayer canvas. Like why not lean into all of those things?
Yeah, and Tom's point of like the tools maturing to a point. Like you see that with Framer, which is a new website building tool, but it's combining a lot of the aspects of what Figma can do live, in building a natural website. So it's, I don't know, like even if new tools come around, I think these set of skills are so applicable just going forward because of best practices and universal sort of conventions that people are adhering to. Anybody else have kind of how they use visual thinking in their day-to-day? And welcome to the new Nick, Jack, and Chris. I don't think I've met you before. Yeah, shared brain from Chris. I think it's pretty powerful when you put a product manager, an engineer, and a designer into a Figma file. Pretty
Totally.
wicked. Yeah.
Yeah, that was part of the original magic for me. It was just sitting side by side with Toby and being able to be like, oh, we're actually working on this thing like together. Not just, there's not this kind of handoff process or like slow, step change. It's like, oh, I'm not a designer, but I'm allowed to be in the Figma file, right? Like designers would never be like, hey, just open up the Photoshop file and leave some comments. Like that is not a thing. Those are not words that I ever heard uttered. Instead, it would be like Photoshop file v7_final. Like yeah, it's a whole new way of working. Yeah, a little bit of comment in the chat about visualized value. I think there's a few folks here actually. Like I think a lot of maybe this is a good value prop for the course is getting comfortable creating unique visual assets, whether that's the YouTube creator or a course creator or somebody who makes presentations. So there's a little bit of that, like maybe we can embed a little bit of that. For those who aren't familiar, visualized value is a course from this guy, Jack Butcher, who has made an insane amount of money teaching basically how to create kind of these like minimalistic, kind of reductive, like visual metaphors almost. And he's very good at it, which is why he's famous and has earned a lot of money. And to your point, Bezos, I think there's a little bit of disappointment that everyone's just trying to copy him instead of like finding their own approach to it. But I think there's some things that we can do with this course that would be almost like sneaky. Like people, I don't think the point of signing up to this course is to like find your own visual style. But I think through doing the exercises and getting feedback from Nate in particular, because he's better at it than I am, there'll be a little bit of that, like, oh, I think I'm one step closer to finding a personal visual style and being able to put like an interesting framework on a slide or a YouTube still or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I think that there was a lot of good stuff that he shared, but most people, I feel like, came out of it just trying to do the absolute most like reductive thing versus understanding that, like, having consistency, having some sort of, asking themselves, I think for folks like us, what's the minimum viable like image that supports the thing you're trying to say versus like, how do you make something that has like the most white space on a page was, but
Right.
I think
but that's also, I mean, anyone who's popular gets knockoffs and ripoffs. I mean, it's kind of like visualized value is also like so big that like, I guess you're going to see a lot of copycat things. But yeah, I mean, that's also what I like about working in Figma, and I think I said this before a little bit, is like to your point, Alessandra, about Canva, is like, I'm not an amazing designer, but from starting the blank page, I end up somewhere more distinctive than I would if I use a template from off the shelf, right? Like a lot of people look at my website and say, I love your website. It's like, it's distinctive. Like, where did you get the theme? And I'm like, I just hand coded it. And it's like, I didn't think it's very good, but no one else has it. Right? It's mine, right? And so I think that's also, there's like a magic moment there. Again, especially for independents and widows. I hope nobody gets offended by me calling them a weirdo, but I think we're all weirdos here. You know, yeah. And I think that's an interesting kind of wrinkle to this course. And again, it goes back a little bit to that perspective of like, how professional are we supposed to be here? Like, is this for product managers, and are we expecting teams inside organizations to buy this, or is this like really for the kind of creators and indie consultants of the world? And we're going to make it weird and unique. I think there's a spectrum or a tension between those two things. Hopefully we can try and do a bit of both, but there may be some failure modes in the middle of trying to do both. Alessandra said keep it weird. Yeah, I mean, I think whatever we do, it's going to have a little bit of weird in it. I don't think you can take that away. You can't wring weird away from my cold dead fingers. But yeah. Any reactions to the? I had a course outline in the Google Doc PDF that I pasted in. This is not in any way, shape, or not set in stone in any way, shape, or form. I literally was just like, hey, what if, and wrote some things down. But any reactions to that as what works, what doesn't work, anything you change? And for those who aren't sure where I'm looking on the Figma, you can just click the T in the top icon, and it'll zoom you to a keyboard shortcuts. Bezos says, okay, yep, that could be useful.
Yeah, we just copy pasted those, Alessandra, into Figma.
Yeah, sorry, the Google Doc is just a PDF upload of a Google Doc inside Figma because why not?
Also, if you have any questions about what you can't do in Figma, to add to that list, if there's anything missing from that list, I'm kind of curious to know. Yeah, love that, Romain. I've been experimenting with Apple's new freeform as well. Just love these infinite canvases, and I can kind of drag everything in there. Does anybody have experience with prototyping in Figma? Or has that ever been a need? A little bit? Not really? I'm wondering if that's like...
I did last year, did like the wireframing, like it was a course at UC Berkeley on graphic design. And I'm over here thinking, oh, all I have to know is Adobe. So I was really glad at the end of the course when the professor said, well, you can do it in Figma. And my partner works for ArcTouch, and they develop apps and websites and cool shit. And I was like, do you all use Figma? And they were like, hell yeah. Like, oh, okay. Well, there's a cool factor then.
Yeah, become the cool kid amongst your friends, learn Figma.
Yeah.
That's going to be our new tagline. I
Definitely
think.
was not, the status was not part of Figma early on, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, how would you typify it? How did
Oh,
they
it was
start?
just like in browser only. It was very, really on the edge, and you're kind of a moron for using it outside of Photoshop tools.
Oh, so keep it weird is a thing for Figma users. All right. I still don't get Fig Jam, but that's not important, is it?
Yeah. Well, I think we would definitely. I actually do want to cover that, touch on that, like Fig Jam versus Figma a little bit. Like, so in the outline that I sketched down, week 3 was like running a workshop. So I think that's kind of a core use case, and wraps up a bunch of these kind of like working with others, collaboration, sharing. A lot of text work in particular, so like text fitting and stuff, which again is actually not something that I'm very good at. So yeah, deliberately part of that would be like, why Fig Jam, why Figma? you know, one versus the other. Finger painting.
Have you heard of that? I've never heard that.
I've not heard of that, but I like it.
I like it too.
I'm a finger painter. Yeah.
I'm curious what you guys call software engineers.
Yeah.
I'm curious what experience level you guys are going for, because I'm a finger painter, but I'm a bit of a Luddite. So I think visually, but purely with pen and paper. And I've been trying to get into Figma I'm trying to run a photography business with varying levels of success over but like I'm trying to use Figma to do what I'm essentially doing, you know, with pen and paper every single day. And every time I get into it, it's just like, I don't know, it doesn't click. And I'm wondering if it's because it's like directly against my nature, but I'm just wondering, is this something, you know, like I'm not a knowledge worker, I'm not a project manager, but I do want to learn this because I do want to be able to put together like pitch decks and use this to, you know, go deeper in my own projects, but as well as projects I want to do with clients in the future. And so I'm watching you guys with the map, you know, you guys are moving your cursors and stuff. And like I know I have downloaded it and I play with it, and it just feels like there's such a learning curve that I would have to go through before it even begins to rival what I can do with just a pen and a piece of paper.
Yeah. I mean, that's like a soundbite for the whole course, I think, is like, the highest ambition, if we do this right, is to take people like you, not to all the way to the end, not so you know everything about Figma, but deliberately far enough along so that you feel comfortable using Figma, right? I think that would be like the dream outcome from this kind of course would be, so, you know, like I want the testimonial from you on the homepage saying exactly what you just said, and then after the course I can, you know, X, Y, and Z. But I'm curious. Is there a specific like task or thing or action that you were trying to do in Figma? Like, can you walk us through that frustration a little bit, or that kind of like something that didn't work?
Well, I don't know if it's something that necessarily didn't work. It's just a lot of the, you know, the images I'm using, I'm looking to like, I'm adjacently interested in design as an editorial design, typography, gridding, and all that, because a lot of my images I want to put into either book format of some sort, you know, at the basic level zines, but, you know, like, you know, with the bigger clients, I'm hoping eventually I can work with full on, you know, book shape projects, you know, anywhere from 40 to 80 pages. It's just with this, I don't know, I might be in the wrong program altogether. Maybe I just got to stay in Adobe InDesign, you know?
Yeah, I'll let Nate chime in kind of on the official guidelines, I guess. I'm not sure. I think that is one area where Figma is perhaps weak. Is print layout stuff. I know that text tools have gotten better, but yeah, do you have a perspective on that, Nate? Like,
before you go, Nate, what I would like to use Figma for personally, besides doing client work, is well, one, to be able to take you know, what I do with pen and paper and put it on the computer. I think the reason I haven't been able to get over the learning curve, besides the skills, is I have an attachment to pen and paper, because I feel like at any moment I can open up my binder and just take them all out and I can see it there. And the tangibility is like, I feel like I own it. And something about digital, that's just a personal thing. I just feel like it's in the cloud too much and I don't derive as much value from it. But what I would really like to use it for is, you know, everyone with an iPhone, Android thinks they're a photographer nowadays. And so the way I can pitch and present myself using Figma to present certain projects, you know, like I do think of myself as a consultant, besides just like, hey, I want to take some images of your business, pop it in social media. I want to present something like, hey, I think these images would be great on your website. This is your current situation. This would be great for a newsletter, and kind of show how different styles and different, you know, like how it can help them out, besides of like everyone just thinks, here's your image, social media, $100. Like that's just like, come on, that's just like a
yeah.
I think you hit on it right there at the end. Was just, that's what you want to do, is actually create mock-ups of using your photography. Maybe you're kind of doing some pen and paper ideas, kind of visual thinking there, but am I correct in that, where you're like on the digital side, you're actually wanting to provide some guidance or some prototypes in a visual sense for your clients to say, hey, this is what's possible potentially This is what it might look like if you were to post this using social media. You want to maybe mock it up inside a little ad or something. Is that kind of along the lines?
Yeah, absolutely. Because pen and paper is just pretty much just an extension of my mind. I'm not gonna send snail mail by 11. But if I can put it, in a Figma file and then share it with them, that's completely different. It's a game changer.
Yeah. I said this at the beginning. I'll say it again. I haven't found any tool as effective as Figma for bringing people on that journey. That kind of like getting people to buy into a like a concept or a mental model change, or like getting them over that like kind of resistance. Figma is just incredible at that, because people think visually, right? And whenever you say, oh, your website's going to look nicer with this imagery, or like we're going to have beautiful imagery on the homepage or whatever, their vision of that is necessarily different to your vision of that. So if you can show them instead of telling them, I feel like it just goes so much further. I did this for a client actually very recently. I was doing a content strategy for Atlassian actually, and part of that was I wanted to there was a new kind of editorial mission that I was kind of concepting, and so I took their blog layout, like screenshotted it, stripped out all the text, just put a white box over it, put in some fake text, and kind of rewrote like a launch letter from the editor talking about this new editorial vision, right? But I mocked it up inside all of the framing that you would actually experience it in the wild, right? So like I didn't share a Google Doc where I had the draft content of the letter to the editor. I actually like you put it in the real frame, and something about that, like it's like a sleight of hand trick almost, but it's just so much more compelling, right? Like people just look at it and they're like, oh, okay, I can kind of actually see how this would come to life, right? Like it's, and people treat it in a different way than if you share a Google Doc with text. They're instantly like adding comments to it and like critiquing the copywriting, and it's like, that's not what I want here, right? What I want here is just like, look at the vision, right? Like, and I think Figma is just great for that.
Yeah, I think one thing to add is like being able to kind of pull the future to the present, and having really any idea that you can think up. And most likely Figma you can get prototype yourself the way there, or you can design your way there, or you can kind of lay out, but you can do something to communicate that visually. And yeah, Figma is not great for book publishing in the traditional sense, but there's so much stuff that surrounds the book that Figma could be useful for. So all of the things that you talked about from a marketing standpoint could be done in Figma. You could do mock-ups in Figma of the book itself. Ship 30 for 30 typically publishes images, for their course, and a lot of people use Figma for that. And it's just to lay out some type on a graphic and then put it out, and that's so fast to do in Figma. So I think that, yeah, stick with InDesign for laying out books, but everything else can.
I'm sure you can share the typography and then just like your proposed grade for the physical object through this. I mean, you're not going to design the whole thing there, but you can definitely do 1 or 2 spreads.
Oh yeah, and I mean even Paul Millard, when he was designing his book, The Pathless Path, we were kind of going back and forth on covers and stuff, and a lot of it was just like throwing them all in a Figma file, kind of comparing them, commenting there, and just you can make a decision so much more quickly when you're doing that versus like doodling something or writing in a Google Doc, like Tom said.
Yeah. I also think so. I'm writing a book, spoiler alert, and I'm doing some book cover design and like interior layout design stuff. I'm not going to typeset the whole book in Figma. I don't think Figma is quite the right tool for that. Although I wish it was. Like I wish there was a kind of a like a type mode for Figma or something that would actually do all the stuff that InDesign does in the cloud. Easy, fast, collaborative, etc. In the same way that InDesign is. In the same way that Figma is for InDesign, but there's a lot of those like tasks around like just designing the spreads, like designing the section pages, also designing the illustrations. So like I'm going to have some like diagrams throughout the book. I'm going to do all of them in Figma. So there's a lot of like the bits and components. I do think you could design a zine in Figma, and actually that's something that would be kind of fun to do. Do like a zine jam inside Figma. That would be a fun exercise that I'd like to try.
Oh, for sure. We should ask Craig Mod to help out with that.
Yeah. Let's get everyone. This is just an excuse to get all the cool people we know on the internet to come join and hang with us on the Zoom in the middle of the workday. All right, we got a few minutes left. Nate, should we talk kind of next steps? This was supposed to be a work session as well as a conversation session. Let's talk about, everyone put their kind of management business hat on for a second. Like, what's the right way to launch this? Any interesting ideas for like who we could seed this to, who we could get involved? I think that we had a vague plan of landing page with, waitlist sign up, email form, doing some of these working in public sessions, and then, again, launch at some point. But there's lots of details missing from that plan, as you can imagine. Any creative ideas or suggestions? Crickets. Nate, what's your plan? What are we doing next?
Well, I think we should kind of cobble together a lot of the insights that we gleaned here, use that for the landing page. We can use that for some copy and just try to figure out like the positioning of this. I think we have a decent idea. I haven't really felt like anybody's really disagreed with what we've pitched. So maybe we can kind of push that along, and then maybe in the next session we can review kind of the landing page. Maybe it's still light on design and more on positioning and pain points.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the landing page needs a ton of design, right? It just needs an email sign-up box in a certain sense. It can be pretty clean and basic. Yeah, I'm very energized by just the people. I mean, the simple fact that everyone's joining us on this Zoom call, for starters. Thank you everyone for coming and spending your time and interest. Like, that's a strong signal. I think that there's something here, and so I'm excited to kind of keep pushing on the positioning. I think it was your point, Alessandra. Like, I don't think we're actually going to make this too straight-laced and go full like Figma for product managers. I think it'll probably stay Figma for knowledge workers or something similar. We can always still position it as product managers is one of the audiences, but I'm excited about just capturing that enthusiasm and kind of creating some momentum out of it. I guess what I'm trying to say is like there's also this kind of sense of like sprinting to a first version of this, like a beta cohort or a first trial cohort kind of thing, I think is the right answer, instead of trying to overly polish this and make it like finish it. We have to finish it, right? We can get to a point where we feel like we can run some people through a trial cohort, and I think like getting there sooner rather than later would also be the goal.
Oh, Nick, this is great. You want to speak up real quick?
Sorry, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Great. Sorry, I've been trying to chime in. I'm on site, so I might get interrupted. But yeah, basically what I said in the chat, I'm a creative strategist at a design agency. And my role, kind of to borrow a gaming term, is to be a dungeon master, if you will, and guide adventuring parties. And my dream, like I said, is for Figma to kind of operate as part knowledge base, where it's this experience where you can learn about what the scope of our work should be, what the challenges for our audiences, et cetera, but then also part collaborative space where we can kind of create those artifacts and prototypes and just see them happen in real time. PowerPoint and PDFs to me have always been too restrictive. The trouble, like I said, has been kind of making it an immersive experience that people can pick up and use without being Figma experts. Because every time we use FigJam and Miro, it kind of feels like a Fisher-Price version of a collaborative space. And Figma to me just feels so much more refined and thoughtful. So that's kind of the knife's edge I'm sitting on, and I'm trying to learn more about how to make Figma more accessible without making it childish isn't the right word, but without making it too easy. And I think that should come across what I'm trying to say.
Totally.
But that's what I'm trying to think of Figma as.
I definitely empathize with that position. Like FigJam and Miro feel like doing it with the gloves on.
Yes.
And you just want a little bit more powerful, right? And so again, that's like the whole raison d'etre for this course, I think, is taking people in that position and giving you that confidence to feel like you can just play in Figma and not have to worry about, like you said, dumbing it down or like using the safety version in a sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been using Notion in some ways like that, but to me, Figma, you can almost essentially make it a knowledge base that is technically a prototype with navigation. But again, I'm just trying to figure out how to do it in a way that people aren't overwhelmed when they jump into it.
It's great.
That's fantastic. And you can take that idea pretty much as far as you want, which is so cool about it.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nick. What's left, Tom?
I think we should wrap. Give everyone the 2 minutes back. Yes, as the meme goes. This is great. Thanks everyone for jumping in. We will do more of these. I think the plan. Thank you for the inspiration, Johnny. Is really just to like just build it in public. I think it's going to be fun to showcase our working. It's also a good way for Nate and I to give ourselves some accountability as have some people chiming in. But yeah, any other thoughts? You know, shoot us a note on Twitter. Leave some more comments in the Figma doc. You know, follow up. We're really just like sketching it out right now. So all feedback and ideas welcome.
Yeah, appreciate it so much. Thanks for being here. We'll see you later.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Good to see you again, Nate.
Great to see you.